This episode of the CUInsight Experience is brought to you by Allied Solutions. With over 40 years of experience, our friends at Allied Solutions are focused on helping more than 4,000 clients grow their bottom line, protect their business and members, to evolve and stay ahead of the competition. Welcome to episode 137 of the show. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and I'm excited you're here today. This show is all about taking a deep dive with the leaders of the credit union movement that make it so great. Today, I'm having a conversation with Carol Marx. Carol is the president and CEO of the Hawaii Credit Union League, so let's jump right in. Carol, welcome to the show, and it's awesome to meet you.
Well, good morning. Hello, Randy. Thank you for having me here. And I'm so pleased to be able to join you on radio, on the podcast.
I should have said aloha. I apologize. I'm dropping the ball. I feel like Monica's going to be like, come on, man. So I was really excited about this, to have this conversation. There's so many directions I wanted to go. And I always think it's interesting from a leadership perspective to talk to somebody as they come into an organization, because there are a lot of people I think that listen to the podcast who either would someday like to be a CEO, or maybe they're early CEOs. So what we can learn from each other. So let's just jump right into it. You're fairly new to credit unions, not short on experience in financial services, obviously. So could you tell us a little bit about your story? Where'd your career start, and how did it lead you to where you are today, leading the Hawaii Credit Union League?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So Randy, I've been in financial services for over 30 years, and I've been started with community banking, actually savings and loan back when they had them. And then we got merged into a community bank. So I've worked for the two largest community banks here in Hawaii. And for a short stint in the pre-Great Recession era, I did work for a joint venture called Inter-Island Home Loans. And it was a joint venture of Countrywide Mortgage and the developer, Stanford Car Development. And we had a joint venture at that time. But as we all know, the Great Recession was not kind to any of our financial institutions. So over time, that joint venture quickly became working for Countrywide and then Bank of America, who took it over. And it was a short time, but it was great experience and learning for me, having been in management for so many years. But I want to go back, Ryan, to when I started in the savings and loan business, because I actually used to call on credit unions when we'd go and market to them what was called a jumbo certificate of deposit. And those were for $100,000. And I called on maybe 20 or 25 credit unions throughout Honolulu. And I would say I knew back then what a great set of folks they were. Very, very salt of the earth and really, really warm and welcoming, just as they have been for me in this past few weeks.
I love it. And I think all of us, once we get into the credit union movement, we're like, oh, this is different. This is amazing, right? Like, the folks are just great. I've met most of my best friends have come from this lucky opportunity. So tell me, what excited you? You mentioned that you knew of credit unions, obviously, and you'd worked with them back in the savings and loans days. But what excited you about the opportunity to lead Hawaii's credit unions and take over the Hawaii Credit Union League?
I believe I'm excited to be in this role because the credit unions have done so much for their membership, and they will continue to do more. And I think advancing the awareness of credit unions with their financial well-being for all model, and just the things they do so quietly behind the scenes, saving their members thousands of dollars on their mortgage payments over time because they gave them a preferred lower rate than what you might be able to get at another competitor. I think they do great work with bringing wellness, financial well-being, not just financial well-being, but also health concerns by supporting the Credit Union for Kids movement. And I believe, during this times of adversity in the local, national levels, the credit unions can maybe join up once again and support the community as they've always done, by taking a stance on helping with rent subsidies or housing finance, various community needs as they do currently with food drives, and just, during the pandemic, how they all came together and helped with the PPP loans. The credit unions are not afraid, and the leaders of the credit unions are not afraid to get involved, roll up their sleeves and, help out.
Absolutely. Hawaii specific here. I talked to Monica Bells quite a few times over the past few years, and I know Hawaii, being so tourism based, was greatly affected by the pandemic, right? How are things overall in Hawaii? I was there in end of January, I believe, and things seem to be getting back to normal, but how are the credit unions holding up in the communities in general?
We love Monica in Kauai, and she's done great things for her community there, as well as the other leaders. Hawaii is bounced back, where our tourism at the current time, 2022, is back to pre-pandemic level. You can barely find a seat. The planes are full. The prices are high. The restaurants are full, and we have staffing shortages. So we just ask all our visitors to come, enjoy, spend lots of money, and be patient if your food takes a little longer, because
if it takes a little bit longer.
We're doing our best to get good eats to them quickly.
Absolutely. So and correct me if I'm wrong here, but doing a little bit of homework for this show, it looked like you, like maybe early on in your career, were in the kind of the marketing branch level side of things. And you said something about Hawaii's credit unions, but I think it's in general is a lot. We have such an amazing story to tell, but maybe we don't get it out there a lot or well enough. Any thoughts on how credit unions, maybe blimp level, but also in Hawaii because my guess is if it plays in Hawaii, it's going to play across the whole country, right? Like, can get that awareness up and out there more so that more people know about credit unions?
Well, I believe that the economist Mike Schenck from CUNA did a great job just recently with a white paper that he wrote on statistics that credit unions across the nation have helped significantly more than our community banks. I think we have seen that the data that they pulled together from Equifax was telling a good story. So with the data, we'll be able to tell a better story about how the credit unions are actively helping with their specific products and services. They really get behind the members, not just as a number, but they know the history of the members, the family, and that helps them provide credit decisions maybe that other financial institutions might not have come, about with the same decision. So just being there in the community, in many underserved communities, I believe knowing the members personally, the first person they might see is a teller at a credit union when they find out that they've lost their job or they've had a hardship in their family. And that teller who served them for 20, 30 years or maybe even longer is a friendly face that they can still rely on to give them guidance. So with those stories, and that there are many, I think the credit unions can continue with their movement. And it's time to rally up and unite as they've had in the past. So yeah, I think we have more to tell, and we should share the good news about credit unions.
Share more. I agree. So let me ask you this. You're a couple months in now, as you mentioned. Is there anything that maybe before that you weren't necessarily thinking of before you came in that has you really excited today? Or what are you most excited for if, say, we were looking out over the next 6 months or a year for Hawaii's credit unions?
I'm excited that the credit unions are present and aware of their community needs. And with that and the power of their united front, they can perhaps help with not just the housing situations in the local communities. They can help also with their community health providers. They can assist with situations where just the basic needs of the humans in our communities are not being met. Not for lack of trying. I believe it's just maybe it's time we all have to come together, the credit unions, the other financial institutions, the healthcare providers, the government leaders, and, of course, our first responders, police, fire, the nurses out there. If we all continue to pull together to be, you have to all give a little. And with that, we'll try and build more workforce development housing. We'll try to provide better services at a grassroots level, which might be, care with mental illness or care in just feeding and guiding people who have lost their way, if you will.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this. It's a question I've asked other folks that were fairly newer into the position or the current job. If we were to sit down a year from now, what does success look like to Carol? Like if you were like, that was a heck of a first year.
I would be very happy to see all of the credit unions in our league continuing to thrive, to adjust to the economic changes, to weather the rate changes, the staffing issues. I would be very inspired to see if the credit unions could better prepare for their successors to take over, as some of the presidents are getting, a little bit older.
Not getting any younger.
Yeah, older, younger, wiser, but just teaching the staff or grooming the staff for succession. I also would be delighted if the credit union movement here locally or nationally really resonated their voice on the need for, I don't know if it's housing reform, but housing support. What can we do on various levels to help people feel safe in their homes, in their community? There are other issues, of course, that abound, but, housing is one of the first, and then food security, of course. And mental wellness. We need to do what you're doing. Just provide joy, Randy. Put more joy in the world so everybody can reflect and be happy every day.
Yeah, exactly. Every day we wake up and take another breath, right? I tried to make a concerted effort this year because I felt like maybe a little bit on the podcast, we were all sick of talking about the last couple of years. So how do we look forward again, right? It's a much smiley, happier place. So anyways, I have a question, and this is completely one of those scratch my own itch. I get to pick people like your brains on something like this, but I think it was the end of last year. I was listening to a podcast, another one. And they asked the question of, what was a great investment or the greatest investment that you made in your career that you look back on and you're like, wow, I'm sure glad I did that. And I've used the example because it was the one used on the podcast, was Warren Buffett said it was Dale Carnegie speaking courses. So is there something that you look back on in your career that you're like, boy, I'm sure glad I did that?
I would say similar to Warren Buffett. I think the greatest investment that I undertook was, I think at a young age of 18, I actually took the real estate salesperson course. And it was many, many years ago, of course, if you can imagine. It provided me insight on ambition and courage, how to speak to people, how to network, just how to enjoy engaging and finding common ground with people so that you connect. It was a time that I was in college. I was working 3 jobs, but I never look back and say, darn it, I should have saved that money. I really, truly enjoyed that course. And, in a way, it's led me into the mortgage world, and many of my friends are realtors. So, I would say that would be a good investment.
So let me ask you this. I mean, a sales course, and I remember when I was early on at Morgan Stanley, I went through one too, right out of college there's still so many things that I think I took out of. And at the time I was probably like, what is this? A sales course, right? But naturally, was that something that you were good at before that? Are you an introvert, an extrovert? Is being out there and talking to people, is that something that you were always comfortable with?
I guess most of my friends and those that know me would say I am an extrovert. One of my first jobs was working at Farrell's ice cream parlor. Now that takes us a way back, and that's where you're singing and banging the drum and making all kinds of joyous noises. And I love just meeting people and putting my hand out to shake the hands of others and just introduce myself. And I find so much interesting discussions, and there are people that have great stories to share, like you. Who would have known, right? That we have some similarities with University of Montana, go Grizz. And we definitely don't discover if we don't introduce ourselves and also share our own stories. So I think that's the other reason why I like meeting people and being an extrovert. Yes.
I love it. Carol and I were talking before we hit record. Her daughter is at the University of Montana, and I had mentioned that Jill was from Montana and got her start. And Jill's been on the show quite a few times, so people, they probably get sick of hearing me talk about Jill, but she makes me smile.
Yes.
So, this was a question that I was really looking forward to asking you again, because you're coming into an existing team, right? You have your leadership team there, but it's now yours. This year, I've been asking a lot about building the leadership team. So I guess I would still throw that out to you, but also I thought it might be interesting to talk about that decision-making process as you're coming into an existing team as their new leader. Is there something you look for? We talk a lot about culture, but when it's almost taking that step back to what are the people that you're looking for to be on that team? What qualities do they have, to help you lead an organization and support Hawaii's credit unions?
Well, I'm very grateful to my predecessor, Dennis Tanimoto. He left behind the most proficient staff, so I'm blessed with that. But if I were to say, what do I look for in a good team, I would say I love them to be authentic and be passionate. The culture is that of teamwork, so giving of themselves so the team can better coexist, and their commitment. So lucky for me, the team has been running just on, autopilot. Although I will say there are so many things that get them there, so many behind the scene work that they do, which makes it seem that it's easy, but it's not. And so I appreciate all of the staff that I've had who've put their heart and soul into the work they do, and whatever I can do to develop them further and coach them and, get them to the next level, I'm dedicated to do that as well. And that's just how we build great teams. I love doing that.
Okay. I've got a couple questions, so I'm going to try to stay in some sort of order in my own head here, because you're making me want to ask more, which is always fun. So that means I'm enjoying this a lot.
Yeah.
I'm going to kind of start with the one other side of it. Is there something that's a no-go for you? Like if you were interviewing for a new employee or a new team member and they were to say something, or there was something, is there something that just shuts you down where you're like, that's not happening?
I guess, I always like to look for the good in people. But once in a while, you get your spidey senses going and you realize that something's not matching up. And so when you interview people, when their story wanders a bit and it doesn't, go from A to B as smoothly as it should, there's a missing piece to it. I guess if they are not open, authentic, I said before, if they're a little bit afraid to share and train, then I'm not really fond of that sort of person.
It doesn't excite you. So you mentioned your team and helping your team grow as a leader. How do you give feedback And do you have an example, maybe in the past? The nice part about you being at a new gig is we're not talking about probably anybody on your current team so far, so we don't have to mention any names. But, where maybe you were disappointed or the results weren't what your expectations were or what you wanted, and you had to give that feedback to kind of get people to course correct, let's just say.
I like to ask the staff to share their experience first, and I like to listen to their version of what they feel went down. Many times they already know themselves how it looks. And so rather than just jumping to feedback and solution, I've learned from many a good loan officer that, hey, I just want you to listen to what happened. And when we talk about the situation, for example, maybe there was a little bit of high tense discussion between an individual and a customer, I will always reflect and explain that they should understand they don't know the true situation of the customers. We don't know what happened to the customer that day. They might have, had a really hard morning with a parent, with a child. Their own situation might be such that money is tight. And so when you get to a discussion of a roadblock, then sometimes the horns come out and people, they're not as easy to work with. So my feedback is more like, we just have a discussion, I would say. And then I always ask them to consider, what could they have done differently? And then they come up with their own, I think, future paths. And also they come up with a way that they can better manage the same situation in the future.
I like that. That was something that was very difficult for me. I'll be honest. And I've probably mentioned it on the podcast before, being like a founder led company for so long, like asking, what would you do? Instead of just like, this is how I'd do it. But like asking more questions, that was a difficult thing for me to learn. I wish I would have learned it earlier. So I should have talked to you years ago. Goodness. So tell me, what, in your experience, you mentioned having some like people that you worked with who you took things from. What do you think makes a good CEO or a good leader in general?
I believe a good CEO, a good leader, they lead by example. They're brave. They're inspirational. So definitely having the ability to pull out the salient points to their endeavors, and then taking that and bringing it to the forefront of the team and saying, this is our why, and here is our passion. And how do we then surround the purpose that we know is our passion with our good work? So I've worked for many fantastic leaders. They're good businessmen, businesswomen, and they're not afraid to take the helm and explore where no man has gone before. No, really, they just are inspirational is my best way to sum it up.
So I added this question, and I apologize that I didn't send it to you in advance, but I think it's kind of like one of the other ones that I did send you. The more I thought about it, I thought it would be interesting. My guess is during your interview process, the board of the Hawaii Credit Union League, you didn't just probably go in and go, we're going to do exactly the same thing we've always done. Right? Like, so I'm sure you brought some ideas to the table and things of that. How do you communicate change and bring people along so that they feel ownership also and kind of get away from that? And I'm doing air quotes on a podcast, but that's the way it's always been done mindset.
I like that question. Thank you for that. I would say what I proposed and what I'm doing currently is I'm doing a lot of listening, as we talked about. I'm reflecting on what was done in the past and its successes, and I recognize the success. I also have been asking for the staff's input on what they thought, the changes might be that would continue to sustain the organization and bring more value to the credit union members that we serve. So by kind of going back to the leaders, not just the staff, but the board of directors, they already have their strategic ideas, and the staff has gone through strategic planning. So people there have an idea of what they want to do and how they want to get there. So in my perspective as a leader, it's refining what is already kind of in the foresight. The destination is kind of set, but providing some different ways to get there. You know, maybe we're going to try it a little different so that it's a new experience and it might be more invigorating to the people on the journey, the staff, the board of directors, the credit union members that we serve. So that's what I say.
That's a really interesting one there to me. And it was a question that I planned on asking later, but I think this ties in better, is this idea that, and I think we've seen it a lot over the past few years, taking action or change. We all seem to do that pretty well nowadays. But we were kind of forced to. But I think what we've realized maybe a little bit more, or at least what I've been thinking a lot about, is to take the appropriate change. Like having the appropriate action, like, and which is the right one at the right time. So like, as you're coming in and you know the strategic direction of the organization, but like how to take the, I don't know if this question makes sense or not, but the appropriate action today as the leader and how to direct that forward. I guess any thoughts or hacks on how you do that?
Oh, well, appropriate is a good descriptor. I believe it's just stacking up the choices and deciding which path is better. You know, one thing I found in my short tenure is that there are very different credit union organizations, you know, the small, the large, they offer different products, and just like human beings, we're all so different. And so the one thing you decide to do is going to be perceived in so many different ways that kind of socializing the opportunity for change and getting the buy-ins beforehand, getting opinions on what these different minded human beings can see would happen with the change will help develop the best course.
Let me ask you this last kind of question in the leadership section, then we'll have a little bit of fun with some rapid fire questions, but I do want to be respectful of your time. We talked about earlier, and it's been mentioned, I think quite a bit, quite honestly, over the past year or so, but this idea of talent is a tough thing to find. So if we as credit unions want to attract that top tier talent to come into our movement, what does a career in credit unions look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Because you and I both grew up in the financial services industry. Most of our careers, they probably told us that we had to sit behind a desk the whole time. That's kind of changed, right? Like that, maybe that expectation. There was always going to be the in-person, but the world's kind of changed, right? So like if we're trying to attract the best talent to come into credit unions, what does a career in credit unions look like, in your opinion?
I believe a career in credit unions can take many different paths. So you're going to have the individuals who want to sit in the CEO seat, and that's what they want. So they're asking, how long, you know, what's the fastest way for me to get there? What do I have to do to progress? And I want to be a leader. So you have the bold individuals, and we need them. We need them to be bright, financially educated, and yet inspirational, as I mentioned before. Then you have the supportive type of individuals who they just want to serve their community. They want to be interfacing. It might be on a chat in the future. It might be just over the phone or video chat. You know, everything's moving so quickly. The in-person interface might not be as frequent, but the serving heart individual definitely will have opportunity to have a great long career in credit unions. I notice that people who start their employment with credit unions often don't leave. There's a lot of tenure. And the reason is the culture is so embracing and welcoming. And, you know, it might not be the highest paying job, but the nurturing spirit of the role pays them in ways that you can't explain. And then there's the governance and the compliance person. So definitely we need people with high, you know, technical skills and very paying closely attention to the details. So we will be able to, I think, cultivate good future credit union leaders and, just pick up the phone and come in and get an application. We need you.
We need you. All right. So some rapid fire questions for you. The questions are rapid. Your answers do not have to be. All right. So just a little bit of fun, get to know more about Carol. Often, and it's a conversation that's come up over time, this idea that like a lot of the times you kind of mentioned it even about the go-getter wants to be the CEO leader. And when I have CEOs on the podcast, I always love to ask that question of often leading an organization can consume us. So any hacks over your career on how to balance the personal relationships with the work relationship when you're working your way towards that CEO chair?
Well, it's helpful to have a very understanding partner and husband and, understanding, children, but the balance is really set by yourself. And so, recently I found the most, energizing way to balance is every morning just open the door and walk out and head somewhere for, half an hour to an hour and just get the blood circulating. Think about all your things that you did well yesterday, going to do well today, and just soak up the sun. In Hawaii, you can imagine we're very fortunate, but rain or shine, I just walk out the door and I try to get that lucky walk to the beach and back before you know it. I did it today, even though we started early here in Hawaii.
We are starting early for you, that's for sure. And I just checked off a question I was going to ask you because I was going to say, you live in a very beautiful place on this planet. So what do you do to disconnect and recharge? You just told me. And I will say this, I have to say this about Hawaii. I am a beach island person and I've been to over 50 countries and territories, and Hawaii is the only place every time I've been that when I walk off the airplane, there's like that smell that just hits me that everything is better in the world. I don't know if that's the aloha feeling, but I've never been anywhere else on earth that just like takes you over as soon as you get off a plane. So there's my tourism commercial for Hawaii. So when was the last time that you were amazed, either personally or professionally?
I'm amazed every day, but I would say the last time I was amazed, I was thankful to be in a board of director retreat with it was a medical professional conglomerate. And this team of, community professionals, put on a retreat for the board of directors and the doctors and physicians and, all the people that serve on their boards for their organization. And they inspired me by what they talked about needed to happen for the community to improve. They're doing great things working upstream with high school kids that, eventually in 18 months can get trained and come out of graduation with a job at one of their health organizations. And what they're inspiring me or amazing me with is that they're trying to, from the root, develop solutions for the future. So not pull people out of poverty, but direct them into financial stability, and then taking care of themselves mentally and physically and being able to provide and support their own selves with housing. So I was amazed.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I can see why.
Yes.
What's the greatest album of all time? That one you can listen to without skipping a song.
Every day I listen to Unforgettable by Israel Kamakawiwiole, and it is a very happy way to start the day. It's 53 minutes, and I know how long I've walked if I listen.
I love that so much. What are you currently reading, or is there a book that you have either gifted or you just think everybody should read?
I recently read a book by Robert Reffkin, and he's the founder, one of the co-founders of Compass. It's a real estate company. And one of my dear friends, she gave me this book, and it's called No One Succeeds Alone. And it's a fantastic story of inequality, of overcoming situations that, a single mother, didn't think she could, but she did. And her son succeeded along the way. And he gives credit to a lot of people who helped him. And I believe I've been so blessed to have many, many supporters along the way who I refer to as my own board of directors.
Your board of directors.
Who helped me get through some of the tough times in life, So props to my husband. He's one of my top chairmen of the board for me. And my kids also give me great inspirational ways to get through difficult times. So,
well, I love that. And you've added to my reading list, so I will be hitting up Amazon. When you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind and why?
I would say success triggers images of my father. So my father, comes from humble roots, and some people have heard this story, but he was raised in a small sugarcane plantation camp on the island of Hawaii. And he moved himself and went to business school, and he became an insurance manager. And over the years, he didn't have a long life, but over the many years as I was a kid, I would be able to enjoy his friendships of many people who might have been in the sashimi or fish cutting business. He would go and help them. He would always go to one gas station. He would always go to a certain restaurant. And what I found with my dad is he was actually doing what credit unions do. He was making sure he supported the people who he grew up with. So all of these business owners actually came from that same sugar plantation camp. And
that's amazing.
I found out later that that's why we were going all these years, is because he was just giving back and supporting like the credit unions do, people helping people. He did it the same way. And I've learned in life, if you do that, you always come out a winner. Give more than you can get.
Way to go, Dad. I like that story. Thank you for sharing that with us. And there you go. That's it. The last question that I have for you, and I thank you so much for being here, Carol, is do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners or an ask of our listeners?
I would say my final thoughts, and thank you again for having me on your show, Randy. I would ask that the listeners do as you do, create joy and be positive in the world. There's a lot of negative coming at us. We all know it. But there's always a way to look at the glass half full and be an inspiration to someone every day or as many times as you can. Share the aloha, smile, and encourage everyone to continue forward, because together we can do such great things. We just have to all have the great positive mindset to get it done. And we can.
Well, that is the perfect way to wrap this up. I thank you so much for sharing your aloha with me, because I haven't stopped smiling this entire conversation. So I thank you for that, my new friend. And if people have additional questions of you, what's your poison, I guess? What's the best way to find you? LinkedIn, email?
They can text me, they can email me, they can find me on social media, but I'm not super good about it. But, I still answer the phone. The phone still works as a, two-way conversation. I like that as well.
Enjoy that as well. I'm not sure we're going to put your phone number out there for anybody, because you may get just a bunch of calls from vendors, but we'll put your email out and everybody can reach out, because I'm sure people are going to have more questions. Again, I appreciate this so much. Thank you for being here. We will link to everything we talked about in the show notes today. So thank you again, Carol.
Thank you. I love my vendors and our sponsors. You know that.
That's right. Absolutely. A few things before we go. Make sure to check out our sponsor, Allied Solutions, in the show notes. I'm grateful for their support of the podcast and allowing me to have this much fun doing what I do. Also, please subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We are on them all: Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you happen to listen. And if you're looking for the book mentioned, like I said, I'll be ordering one. Carol added to my list. A quick Google of the CUInsight Experience podcast book list And you can have your next read on its way from Amazon. Last, but certainly not least, I want to thank all of you for listening. Y'all rock, and I appreciate the kind words that come in about the show. Be well, my friends, and I hope to see you all soon.